in the future, we never want to be in a situation again where, in a few short weeks, thousands of people need to be provided with free meals.
Hey Lawrence.
Hey Josh.
I've been thinking about the podcast. How about in the first series we focus on the pandemic?
Yeah, and in each episode we can ask our guest how it's been affecting them and what they do.
We could ask people to join in with the hashtag #PosNegative.
How would we introduce it each week?
We'll just say, welcome to Positive Negative. My guest this week is Kirsty Haigh. We've met a few times, and I think the first was about 4 or 5 years ago at a Global Justice Now event in Glasgow. Since then, I've followed her on social media, where she's a constant source of important posts on important things. And when I looked her up to see what she was doing during the lockdown, I wasn't surprised to see she was so busy. We spoke on Friday, May 29th.
Hi, so I'm Kirsty Haigh. I'm a social justice activist, you might say. I'm a former campaign director at Jubilee Scotland, used to work a lot on international debt issues, and involved in lots of different kind of organisations and charities working on migrants' rights and climate change issues. And then last year I decided to mix it up a little bit and explore my passion for food, and I became a chef. And since then I've kind of been largely full-time chef, working for catering companies, but also working with an organisation in Edinburgh called Food for Good, where I go into schools and I teach kids as part of a food truck project, and then still doing as much kind of activism and social justice work on the side, just in general doing what I hopefully can to try and make this world a little bit fairer and nicer for everyone to live in.
Wow, that sounds, I didn't know that you'd gone into I did when I looked up recently, but to combine your love for food and then your social activism, that's a pretty special thing to be able to do.
It was very exciting. It was definitely a very scary change. I went from being a full-time activist, it was my job, it was my hobby, it was my friendship group, to decide to take it in a slightly different direction. I'd spent 6 months training to become a chef, and doing kind of activism on the side. Being a chef is rather exhausting. It's long hours, it's on your feet an awful lot, but it's also opened my eyes to a whole new world of kind of other problems and problems in the food industry. And just, I'd done some things before in the food system, but this amazing project on Thursdays where I get to go into schools and talk to kids. Some of these kids, nobody in my class could name what a leek was. They don't know about vegetables, they don't know how to cook, and getting to kind of bring this world to them and how important food is as part of social justice and access to good food has just been really interesting, and this amazing experience really, and I feel incredibly lucky that I've been able to have this experience.
Would you like to just give a bit more info on Food for Good and the coalition and what it does?
Yes, so the Food for Good coalition as a whole was created just in result of coronavirus, and it was organisations in Edinburgh that got together, including Edinburgh Food Social, and who want to create a kind of better food system and ensure that everybody has access to good, decent food. And it became apparent very quickly that due to the corona crisis, the number of people in Edinburgh in need of food was going to dramatically increase, and that there was going to be lots of chefs and kind of food professionals all across the city who were being furloughed from their jobs, who had time to cook. So essentially we spent the first kind of few weeks going around and talking to restaurants and cafes and food businesses, asking them to donate any leftover stock that they would have from the kind of unexpected closure. And loads of places did, which was great. And some places donated their premises. So we've got various different kitchens that now different chefs from across the city have come together and joined little teams and are producing meals for people in need across the city. And it's been amazing, in just a few short weeks, really, how many people in Edinburgh have got together to make this work and have put in their times and skills. And we've now fed almost 30,000 people across the city, which is pretty incredible, but also incredibly sad that that is something that's having to happen, that many people are in need of food, and that it's being left to largely volunteers and people putting in their time to make this work, rather than this being a kind of coordinated government effort to ensure that everybody has access to the food they need without volunteers and donated food and donations from the public having to step in to make that happen.
Why do you think it is always, or often seems to be, charities and the voluntary sector that picks up the pieces in, when maybe not situations like this, because this is pretty unique, but why is it charities and the voluntary sector that are often kind of picking up the slack, do you think?
Yeah, it's an interesting kind of sad reality, isn't it? I would like to see a world where actually we didn't need charities to exist at all anymore. The aim of every charity and voluntary organisation should be that they no longer exist, that we solve the problem. But whilst we still have governments that are putting profits before people and not prioritising the needs of the individuals in our society, and not trying to create a society, pitting people against each other rather than ensuring that we create a community, until we have governments that properly address and change those things and move past this highly kind of aggressive, individualistic capitalist system, then we're going to need, good people, charities, organisations, mutual aid groups to step up and be doing this work, because the alternative is that people die, and it sounds over dramatic, but that's what happens when people don't get fed, when they can't get access to healthcare they need. And I'm just eternally grateful and proud of all the amazing people you meet throughout this work who are spending their lives doing what the government should be doing, what shouldn't have to exist. And I'm glad that so many people are willing to do the things that others aren't, to look after each other.
Yeah. So just to kind of go back ever so slightly, I was going to ask you what impact the pandemic and the lockdown has had on you. So obviously, in one sense, it's kind of given you this project to focus on, but just kind of more broadly, what impact has it had on you personally?
Yeah, it's been a really interesting experience in a lot of different ways. I am someone that I would say I'm exceedingly extroverted. I spend my whole time talking and engaging with other people. That's really how I thrive. And you cannot do that in lockdown, which has been a hard kind of experience for me to just, and as we say, I've been quite lucky and I've had this project to focus on. I have my great team in my kitchen of 5 people that I see at least 4 days a week. So that's much more social interaction than a lot of people. And I have a purpose, whereas, some of my friends, I think, are really struggling because at the moment they feel like they don't have a purpose. It's also, just in a very kind of silly, not so important thing, but when the weather is so beautiful at the moment and, Scotland has a very short summer, it seems so sad that we're all largely inside for a lot of things, but obviously, it is the right and the important thing to do. So yeah, it's a very odd experience. In some ways, it's given me time to stop and think about my life and reflect on things that I often I like to keep going at 1,000 miles an hour. Always be doing as many things as possible. Yeah. My kind of life motto is, it's better busy than bored. But this has in some ways been good to maybe stop back and think, but you just can't help but think of all the people that have it worse. And it's, but we all do what we can. And it's been amazing to see how people have been banding together to just keep each other's spirits up and phoning their friend and talking to their neighbour and just checking up on people. So there have been positives, and I feel very fortunate that, I've been able to be in this project.
In terms of the impact it's had on the people you're working with and for people that maybe don't have first-hand experience or can't necessarily relate too well to why people might need to have a meal cooked for them by a charity, can you give us some details of the impact that the lockdown has had on them? I know you've spoken about how, it's a kind of a sad state of affairs when people can't survive for maybe more than a month without a wage.
Yeah, there's been a lot of different things that have had a kind of impact on why people are in need of these meals. So there's the kind of most basic level, which that there was people that were already suffering and needed meals, but before Corona were kind of just being slightly abandoned. So that's homeless people, which, you know, for the first time ever really in society, we've properly kind of started to take care of. They're, you know, in Edinburgh, they're in a hotel, and, you know, we're cooking some of their meals and other people are, to ensuring they are getting fed. You know, one man told us that this was the first time in 10 years he's had consistent meals, which, you know, is very sad, but we're good that's been able to happen. So there's people that kind of already had problems, and then there's lots of kind of people who this is a sort of new, they didn't expect to see themselves in this situation. There's been a lot of people that because of the coronavirus have lost their jobs, and that, you know, with, even if they earned what most people might think is a reasonable salary, they didn't have many savings. They have mortgages or bills that they have to pay, just paying for their day-to-day life. You know, if you've had a new child and suddenly one of you loses your job, that's a whole set of costs that, you know, weren't factored in. So there's people that have lost their job, and then there's people who have been furloughed, who are receiving still some money for the government, but if you were earning minimum wage or even living wage, and now you're only getting 80% of that, that just isn't enough to live off. And, you know, covering then your essential costs is basically impossible. So that's, you know, providing food to help with that is obviously essential. And then there's people that their 80% or their full furlough wage might cover everything they need, but it took basically a minimum of 6 weeks for any of those furlough wages to arrive. For some people, it's taken much longer. So they'll have gone past what would have been 2 paychecks before they've received any money. That's quite a long time for people to not be getting any money. And notably also then people start to get worried about things. So there's also people, you know, and people who are going to receive universal credit, which we also know isn't enough to live off. But the universal credit, it takes a long time for that money to start arriving. So these are people that, like, in the future might not need to keep getting the meals, but they do as a kind of stopgap in between, until they get money to pay for their own food and be able to support themselves again.
Is there any way that people, if people are listening, that they could support the work that you're doing with Food for Good?
Yeah, so there's lots of different ways that people can support it. The one which I always feel a bit silly saying, but is just donating money makes a massive difference. You know, when I say we've made nearly 30,000 meals, providing 30,000 meals isn't that cheap. You know, there's ingredients involved in all of those, there's transporting them around the city. And we've got it, so it's basically, you know, you can feed a family for £20 for a week. So, you know, any donations really make a massive difference to helping feed people. But also if there's, you know, trained chefs that are wanting to get involved, then they can get in touch. People with vans who could help us and be delivery drivers. And also people in other cities and other places. I know that there's similar projects happening in Birmingham, in Glasgow, in London, and I'm sure in some other places. And if not, maybe think about kind of starting one, speaking to chefs and different people, you know, and seeing, you know, if it's, I grew up in Livingston, which is just outside of Edinburgh, in between Edinburgh and Glasgow. And, you know, as far as I'm aware, there's no project like this here, but I know Livingston is much worse off than Edinburgh is. So if we're feeding this many people in Edinburgh, how many people in Livingston must be needing this support? And that's kind of the case everywhere. So even if people can't help us, we'd be so happy to share our learnings and experience and help people support places in other areas where they live.
Okay, so just going back to some of the other things you mentioned, I don't know if you might not feel like you are in a position at the moment to talk about this, but just in terms of things around, so you've done work on migrant rights before. Do you have any insight into the effects that the current situation is having, perhaps on refugees or people who are seeking asylum? Have you kind of got any thoughts on that, either just personal thoughts or kind of from an organisational point of view?
I mean, kind of from a personal perspective, you know, you can see that this the corona is making it harder for everyone in society, and that means that those that were already worst affected in society are finding it considerably harder. Our government in Scotland and in the UK have been creating for years this very hostile situation towards migrants and immigrants, and we obviously need to be doing everything we can to be changing that. But at the moment, when the population is at such high risk and it's desperate, people are looking for people to blame more so than normal. And there's definitely lots of issues and cases that are being ignored. We've seen in this week, Dominic Cummings, his excuse be, he's just a dad helping his child, doing anything he could to help that. But, consistently, we've seen the UK government not let families stay together. We've had asylum seeker and refugee children come over here, and we've passed laws that they can't stay with their parents, and we're exceedingly hostile towards these situations. So, we talk about it's one rule, they're just doing what any dad would when, then as soon as it's not white British people doing it, we use those none of those same logistics and excuses apply. And so it's, there's definitely a lot of people that are finding it very hard. We know that coronavirus is affecting BME people worse in some ways due to living conditions, and the community is more likely to suffer from deprivation, and that is tragic. And as a society, I think it's something which we really need to be thinking about and talking about a lot more, and doing everything we can. There's a lot of, in Edinburgh, we know that there's a pretty large Spanish population, and there's a lot of these people that they're not able to go home at the moment. They're not able to see their family. They're worried. We've had people, get in touch with us at Food for Good and other organisations that I'm part of, who are just genuinely, quite worried and lonely at the moment, because they don't know what's going to happen. They don't know if after this they're going to be able to stay. They were, in many ways, our society has made them feel quite unwelcome, and now they're kind of trapped here and trapped in their house here, and they don't know what to do with it. So there's a lot in our society that we can be doing to really making sure that migrants feel more welcome in our community. And after all this, to make sure that they don't once again kind of become the government scapegoats for the problems, that we start blaming immigration on, the government has spent a massive amount of money on furlough wages, and they're going to be trying to find anything and everything they can to stop spending money and to put blame on other things. And we know that immigrants are always the worst to suffer, so we need to be ready to protect them and defend them in our communities, and ensure that they know that Scotland and the UK as a whole should be and can be a nice and welcoming place for them to live.
What impact do you think that the lockdown is having and will have on social activism?
Yeah, it's having a really interesting effect on activism, because obviously activism has to take place in completely different ways. So a lot of the typical usual ways where you kind of get attention and you get the message out involve, being out in public. Being visible is one of the kind of main ways that people use to create social change. And at the moment, to do that would be irresponsible and dangerous. But then we've seen a massive boom in kind of online activism, and people properly getting used to using tools and doing things properly. The National Education Union had one of their kind of the biggest meetings ever on Zoom, where they were talking about how the schools shouldn't be reopening in England on the 1st of June. And that was able to happen because in many ways, they used the technology and they couldn't meet in person. So everybody engaged in this online activism, and hopefully some of these things we will take forward and use better in the future to make our organising circles and activism more accessible. There are so many online tools that are good, that make things easier for people in different locations to access, easier for people with disabilities to access. And we have seen also just an interest of, there's been different ways people have done things. So even small things like people putting rainbows in their windows, thank you NHS signs in their windows, in many ways that's just a small little form of activism, of people showing support and solidarity in their communities. And there's the clap on Thursday night, which had its last official one last Thursday. I mean, obviously that's not going to change the world, but it does bring kind of support and community spirit. And these things are important, and it's been interesting watching people come up and explore these new ways of doing things. And I think in some ways quite exciting, because I hope that going forward we can continue to slightly think outside the box and expand things in these ways. Yeah, there's no reason why we have to just go back to having kind of stuffy meetings that take place, you know, with just a few people who can access them in a room, and with the only speakers that you can get to be there. There are amazing people that you can connect to all across the world that we can bring in and access their skills and knowledge via online resources. And hopefully that's something that we can, go forward and expand upon and learn from.
Okay, so let's just move on to the next question. How are you feeling today? Is today a good day or a bad day, or how are you feeling?
Today is quite a good day. We had we work in my kitchen. We work Monday to Thursday, and then on Friday I do all the food ordering for the next week and check in with everyone. And I honestly have just this most incredible group of people in my team that, you know, I left the kitchen yesterday after we finished work. We sat outside in the car park, all far apart from each other, of course, and just chatted for a while. And, you know, I left then just thinking about how incredible they are. And I've woken up today just thinking about how incredible they are. And that these people who didn't know each other before now work together in amazing synergy in this kitchen, just banging out just delicious meals all day long with a smile on their faces. And I think also maybe the sun shining is really helping me. But all this morning I have just been amazed at just people being wonderful, and in particular my team in the kitchen. But today, in that sense, it's a good day. Yeah, there's lots.
So I know you've spoken a lot about how the people you're working with inspire you, but have there been any other inspiring stories that you've seen since the pandemic has started?
I've really enjoyed seeing, this is a kind of very odd thing to say in some ways, but in my friendship group and across kind of society as a whole, we know that men generally aren't as good at expressing their feelings and talking to each other. You know, the patriarchy limits in many ways male vulnerability. And it's been really great and interesting to see them, my male friends, start to kind of phone each other and check in with each other in ways that I've never really seen happen before. Usually a lot of the kind of emotional labor around these things happens through the women in the friendship group. And, you know, I say my friendship group, but I've also heard lots of other people talk about this and seen this in many other ways. It's been good to see a lot of men really start to realize that, you know, these are important things, and they need to talk to their other male friends about their feelings and how they're getting on, and things are happening. And it's kind of a very odd thing to say that I've been inspired by, but I really think that is, you know, changing these perceptions around male vulnerability and the patriarchy, and trying to just get us as a society to be more like connected to our feelings and how we feel, and open ourselves up is one of the best ways for changing society and creating us to be better. So that's been making me really happy. And just in general, how many people have been checking on their neighbours and just talking to people and seeing what's going on. And all across the world, you know, you look and there's so many good news stories in amongst all this bad news. You know, there's been loads of amazing successes of different things that they've done across Africa to deal with it. You know, we saw in Korea, they dealt with coronavirus pretty efficiently in many ways. And, you know, everyone's been battling these same but different problems, but dealing with them, you know, with remarkable resilience. And the fact that, you know, the general population just, it's not easy to suddenly go, your whole life is going to change. You have to work from home, you have to stay indoors. And everybody, you know, respected that we need to do this. And it's not just for ourselves, but it's for other people. And that just is quite inspiring, that people did look at this and understand the severity of it pretty quickly and realize that they were part of something, that they had to just do something to help everybody get better.
What do you think it is about society or the kind of the way that we live that makes us not connect in a way that I know that it's kind of very unusual circumstances, so in some ways we're forced to connect more, but once this is over, what is it about kind of the previous normality that stops us from connecting in the ways that we are at the moment, do you think?
I mean, I think it's largely the way that capitalism is inherently built, that it forces us to be in competition with each other, and self-worth and looking after yourself aren't things which capitalism respects. Our whole society and the way the system is built is not meant to make us work together and work cooperatively and reuse things and reduce your food waste and help your neighbours and work together collectively to deal with your problems and solutions. But that's the kind of maybe big level, slightly waffly answer you might say, but on a kind of basic level, it's also so many people in society spend so much of their life at work, and they work ridiculously long hours, and then they work overtime very often that they're not paid for, or they work a second job because their first job didn't pay them enough. And we have, most people are very tied into their jobs, and their job is most of their life, and so they have then very little time and emotional energy to actually, when they leave that, just kind of engage in society fully and properly. They're often exhausted when they leave work. In Britain, we have a very bad drinking culture where, people have had a bad day at work and they all just go to the pub to forget about it. That's not normal, not healthy. We should have, work should be a smaller percentage of people's lives, and people should have jobs which they find more fulfilling and they enjoy more, and people should be paid enough in their jobs that they don't have to spend their whole lives at work. And I think, genuinely, if we could change the world of work and how that does, we would have a society that starts functioning much better. I think one of the main reasons why people have been reaching out and helping each other and connecting is because they have the time to, because now, they're, in general, people aren't doing all the extra overtime. They're not traveling to and from work. Some people just aren't working at all. And that's really one of the main things that I think has been having an impact on what's going on in terms of the community spirit.
So in what ways do you hope all of this will shape the future then?
In so many ways. I really hope that we look at this and we just absolutely don't go back to the way things were, but we now try and reshape things to be much better. That people realise that they don't have to spend, their boss isn't the most important thing in their life, and we need to find new ways to collectively in workplaces work together and say, we want a 4-day working week. We're not going to work overtime unpaid, that people join together and ask for the things they want. But also in terms of the food system, there's been lots of people that have started to shop more locally, partially because they couldn't get what they needed in the supermarket, but also because they can't go as far, and people have started to realise how, independent businesses and their local shops literally won't exist if they don't support them. And I suppose, I really hope that continues, and people realising, that's the kind of community spirit of where we've band together to do things. And that, the hospitality industry as a whole is going to have to completely change. And I hope, we see the end of, in that industry, but across zero-hour contracts and wages that don't pay people enough to live off, because in the future we never want to be in a situation again where, in a few short weeks, thousands of people need to be provided with free meals. We need to change wages and the way work works so that people can earn enough, and if they're on benefits, that their benefits pay them enough that they can afford to live and eat the food that they want to eat when they want to eat it. So I really think in many ways, we've seen this, as I said earlier, the National Teachers Union having like one of their biggest meetings. Hopefully these things continue and people realise that there's power when we work together, and it's amazing what we can achieve when we support each other and we do these things. And I really hope all of this continues and we build a much better, more connected and thriving society.
Fantastic, Kirsty. Thanks so much. I really appreciate you taking time out of your Friday. It sounds like you've got lots to be getting on with, so I really appreciate you taking time out to chat to me.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
Thanks for listening to Positive Negative.
Don't forget, you can follow us on Twitter at PosNegative, or find us on Facebook.
And join in the conversation using the hashtag #PosNegative.
You can help us to grow by leaving us a review and sharing this episode with your friends and followers.
You'll also find links to what we've talked about in the show notes, or by visiting positivenegativepodcast.com.